so as we talked about our question of the day, when we talk about locomotion, it's basically that just refers to the movement of an organism. So how do living things move from place to place? That's what we're studying this section.
Is that a turtle?
That's a Star Wars. That's
Star Wars.
Yeah, and now,
Are you serious?
yeah, AT-AT.
That doesn't even look like a turtle.
Anyway,
Well, actually, it's like an elephant turtle.
this is, so this picture, and I'll show you one. All right, guys, listen. So this one is based on when film first started to be used. There were certain, I don't know if you call them scientists, but people that would try to trace how animals move. Because animals move so quickly, and a horse galloping, for example, they used video and then basically slowed it down, or a series of photographs to see sort of how do horses run. So what is the order? How do their feet touch the ground? How do they leave the ground? What's the pattern of that? And so there's some famous videos of this showing different animals, people moving on a sort of a background, a labeled background, so you can judge distance. But that's sort of where that comes from. This is just a play off of that, the ad. So we're going to talk a little bit about locomotion. So the question is, why do things move? What are some reasons for moving?
Obtaining food.
Find suitable habitat.
Well, yeah.
Avoid predators. Seek shelter.
Getting food, obviously, by being able to move. So some animals are what we call, some organisms are sessile. They don't move. They don't generally move from place to place. They basically stay attached to one area, stays in one place. Others are called motile. They can move. So the advantages of movement are several. By being able to move from place to place, organisms can find other sources of food.
It smells like bread.
They can find other areas to live, spread to new habitats to disperse. They can avoid predators. They can seek shelter, find mates for reproduction, avoid any toxins in the environment. So there's a lot of reasons that organisms can move. What might be reasons why organisms might be sessile? What are advantages of a lack of movement?
Because they're sloths.
Is there any advantage to not moving?
Not really.
Well,
Nate?
you mean
You're not using energy.
Yeah, less energy expenditure, right? Simpler body plans, and you don't need sort of the muscles and so forth, or the organs to move from place to place. So it is save some energy, and for some it's not necessary, and that they can survive and reproduce and go through while remaining basically in one place. But organisms that are generally sessile have means of dispersing their offspring. Okay? Obviously, if you produce offspring and they're right in the same area, then they're going to be competing with the parent for resources. So often, sessile organisms have means of dispersing at one point. So as we talk about our groups that we've talked about for all of these, protists, when we study protists, they are classified mainly by their means of locomotion, how they move around. Okay? Algae, for example, these are algae. What would we call these things? Yeah, those are flagella. Basically a tail used for propelling it through the water. The other protozoans that we studied, paramecium, what do they have? Cilia.
Pseudopods.
Amoeba, you move using these pseudopods. This is a euglena. Again, you could see it has that flagella. So they have special structures, we wouldn't really call them organs, special structures for moving them from place to place. These are aquatic organisms, so much of it's swimming through the water. The Hydra. Hydra's mostly sessile. I mean, it basically sticks around in one place. You know, the stalk of it sort of attaches to the ground, but they can move somewhat. And the way that they move is sort of somersaulting around. They can sort of bend their stalk, their tentacles can sort of grab onto something on the surface and then flip them around and basically somersault around from place to place. Earthworms. So an earthworm we know is made of, it's a segmented worm, has many sections. And they move using a series of muscles that are coordinated. There's two types of muscles that surround the earthworm. There's the longitudinal muscles and circular muscles. So the circular muscles sort of are rings around the earthworm, whereas the longitudinal muscles are perpendicular to that. They go along the length of the earthworm. And so what they do is by alternating, contracting and relaxing the circular muscles, contracting those circular muscles sort of squeezes the earthworm and elongates it. And then when those longitudinal muscles then contract, that pulls it along as those circular muscles contract. So you have this alternating, squeezing to make it thin, and then pulling it in. And you have also these tiny little hairs, these little bristles sort of, on the bottom of the earthworm. They're called setae, and they sort of allow it to almost grab onto the soil as these muscles are moving to pull it along. Okay, so they move up and down or along the soil or through the soil using those muscles and these little bristles. Grasshoppers, we know, are arthropods, so they have an exoskeleton. However, it's jointed, meaning it has lots of boundaries between plates, so movement is possible. Okay, it's made of chitin. An exoskeleton is non-living. We've talked about this before. Chitin's a polysaccharide, a modified polysaccharide, and it forms their exoskeleton. But they have muscles. Arthropods have muscles inside of them. They're attached to their exoskeleton, the interior, and so they allow it to move. And those joints between those plates of the exoskeleton are important. You know, grasshoppers have wings for flight as well. You know, they don't fly far through the air, but they jump and then use their wings to sort of propel them further. I'll show you this video.
Are they flying backwards?
So he jumps, and then once they propel themselves off the ground, they'll start using their wings to fly. But
Why is he going backwards?
I don't know, it's just jumping off. Again, those hind legs are used for jumping, those larger legs.
He looks so
Tuesday 3, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why isn't that exiting full screen?
Escape.
Mr. DeRosa
It
crashed.
escaped.
Damn.
Oh no, it's not what I was hoping for. All right. So, we'll talk mostly about humans. So obviously human adaptations for locomotion are muscles, okay, along with our bones and other connective tissue, are what we use for movement. Our muscles attached to our endoskeleton. They work in conjunction with each other. And it's the coordination of our muscles and tendons and ligaments and cartilage and bones all sort of working together is what allows us to move. So as an adult, we have,
Why is he biting my nose?
206 bones. You know, and many of them are found in the vertebrae. So the vertebrae, there are 33 of them. Okay. In the feet, there are 26 in each foot. Hands have 27 separate bones, 12 pairs of ribs, and then all the other bones of the appendages and so forth make up the bones of our body. In infants, there's more. They fuse over time as the skeleton fully develops. And these bones, they have several functions. They support and give our body a general shape. They also protect important organs. Obviously, the brain is protected by the cranium. The heart, the lungs are protected by the rib cage. The spinal cord is protected by the vertebrae. So they have a protective role as well. They provide a attachment point for the skeletal muscles. They form levers for lifting things. They also store minerals that can be removed from the bones if we need them. Minerals like calcium and phosphorus. And so we kind of think about bones. I mean, a lot of people I think of it as sort of a non-living. It's just like a hard shell sort of thing, like fingernails or something. But it's not. Bone is living tissue. Okay? And it's made of living cells. Okay? Inside of our bones, we have special cells that produce the bone matrix. They're called osteocytes. There's cartilage there, and the ends of the bones are surrounded by cartilage. There's blood vessels and blood that travel through our bones. There's nerves that travel through our bones. There's fatty material. There's connective tissue. So there is living tissue that makes up our bones. But then those living portions also produce some non-living material, some inorganic material that gives the bones sort of their hardness and their mass. Okay, and the main compounds that make up the mass of our bones are calcium-based, calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, and so those make up that non-living matrix. If you look at sort of what the bone is composed of, you can see the various elements, compounds here. Again, 2/3 of it is inorganic, and then 1/3 is organic, the living parts. So the structure of our bones, they have various parts, okay? And so we're looking at, we call these long bones versus flat bones like the femur, the humerus, the ulna. Those are called long bones of our body. In the center, there's an area that contains what we call the marrow. It's soft tissue. Most of the red marrow is found in flat bones and at the ends of the long bones in this spongy bone. Okay? And the red marrow is the marrow that's responsible for producing our blood cells. Red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells. There's also a type of marrow in the center area, in the compact bone of long bones, called yellow marrow. It's mostly fat. And bones are surrounded by a membrane, the periosteum. So a membrane that's around the bone. Okay? It's rich in blood vessels and nerves. It's an attachment point where the tendons attach to our bones. It's also responsible for producing new bone material, for these bones to grow wider. Or if there's a fracture, the periosteum is responsible for starting the formation of that new bone, which is going to help that damaged bone to heal. like we said, the cells, the actual bone cells themselves, are called osteocytes. Osteo means having to do with bone. And they're found, I'll show you a picture in a minute on the next slide, is that they're found around these sort of in circular patterns around a canal, a sort of a gap, a tube that runs through the bone called the Harvesian canal. Bless you. These Harvesian canals basically are tunnels that can contain blood cells and nerves that run throughout our bones. Here we have an X-ray of what? What is this? Yeah, wrist, forearm. Okay, see the bones of the carpal, the wrist bones. See the ulna and the radius. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard of growth plates, right? If you ever had a fracture or something, you know, growth plates are an area where our bones are elongating, or I should say, your bones are elongated. Mine are done. But the growth plate is an area where this bone tissue continues to grow. Okay, it's called the physis, and the part after is the epiphysis, and the part before is the metaphysis. But this growth plate here is where new bone matter is produced, so those bones can grow longer. Okay, and so that growth plate is there, and you can see it clearly in an X-ray. You know, if you go to the doctor and you get an X-ray and they're looking at an area with a growth plate, they can actually tell if your growth plate is fused, because eventually this growth plate seals up. It fuses together, and that's when you're done growing, but you're not going to get any taller. These bones are done growing, and it'll fill in with compact bone tissue. But those are what the growth plates are, and you'll find them at the ends of all the long bones as a person is growing. This is a cross-section of bone. And so what you see here, these little areas, those are the Harvesian canals. Okay? Okay? See them here. And what you see here in these canals is where nerves and blood cells run through them, arteries, veins, and so forth. Okay? And then ringing around the outside of these, each of these rings, are cells called osteoblasts, which produce new bone matter. There are also osteoclasts, which take away bone material. Goes both ways. And then as these bones are growing, some of these osteoblasts get sort of caught up in the bone matrix. Okay? And those are what we call the osteocytes. So that's what it looks. That's one of these. When we look at the bones, you know, I think you know many of these bones, but we're going to study a little bit about these. But you have here, you know, various bones of the skull. Okay, you have the sternum and the ribs and so forth. The jawbone are the mandibles, are the lower jaw. Maxilla are the upper jaw. You have the single bones that are in the upper arms. Okay, the humerus. You have the ulna and radius, which make up the forearm. Okay, you have all the vertebrae. Okay. In the hands, like we talked about, the hands and the feet contain many bones, many small bones. You have the carpal, the wrist bones, and you have the metacarpals. Okay, then you have the phalanges of the fingers. In the foot, you have similar kinds of bones. You know, you have the metatarsals, and then you have the phalanges, which are the toes. The hip bone is actually the pelvis, which you might call the pelvis, is actually made of several bones connected together. And you have the femur, patella, and then you have the tibia and the fibula and the shin. And the scapula in the back, shoulder blades you might call it. Clavicle helps form the shoulder socket, the clavicle and scapula. You know, when we talk about the vertebrae, okay, they're have different terms. Okay, you have the cervical which are the neck vertebrae. Then you have the thoracic vertebrae in the thoracic cavity. Okay? Then you have the lumbar vertebrae, which are the lower back vertebrae. And so we know that where two bones connect, we call that a joint, the junction between two bones. Some of these junctions are immovable. They're called fixed joints. They're basically fused together. For example, in the cranium is made of several bones that fuse together during early childhood. Those are called fixed joints. They're sort of interlocked bones. Our tooth sockets are another example. And then we have the movable joints. And you guys learned about these in 7th grade. A hinge joint. What's an example of a hinge joint? Sophia?
Elbow.
Your elbow. A hinge. It moves only in one plane of direction. Your elbow, your forearm can't move left and right in relation to your elbow. It only moves up and down. Okay? Same thing with your knee. So yeah, I know you guys are doing this, but are you moving your elbow joint? What are you moving? You're moving your shoulder. You're moving at your shoulder. If you hold your upper arm in place, your elbow, you can't move your forearm left and right. Okay, it only moves up and down. Same thing with your knee. If your knee's working properly, it should only move in a single plane of direction. Shouldn't be left to right movement of your foot at your knee. Yeah, you can move your foot like this, but you're really moving your head. So that's a hinge joint. Just back and forth, move it in one plane of direction. Your fingers bend in only one direction, hopefully, unless you dislocated them. What's a ball and socket joint?
Okay.
Your hip,
Your
your shoulder, where the top of the humerus is sort of a round shape. It fits in to the scapula and the clavicle, and it can rotate in a wider range of motion. Okay? Same thing, if you look here at the bones of the femur, it's pretty pronounced. The end of the femur fits right in a little cup-shaped socket in the pelvis, and that allows for a wider range of movements. And that's why you can move your shoulder, you can move where you see the top of the femur, that ball fits right in the socket here of the pelvis. And it's why you can move your hip or your shoulder in several planes. You can move it sort of up and down, you could move it in and out. You have a wider range of motion on these ball and socket joints than you do on a hinge joint. You also have a pivot joint in your neck, in your wrists, in your ankles. They are bones that pivot on each other that allow for sort of side-to-side rotation and up and down movement. Okay, you can move at the top of your neck. Your first vertebrae form a pivot joint where you can move your head left and right, rotate left and right, but you can also move up and down, giving you sort of the whole range of motion of your head. Here you can see elbow, x-ray, and movement. Maybe. And you can see it forms that hinge joint because of the way the bones are arranged. They don't allow for side-to-side movement. Versus in the shoulder, you can see how that ball and socket joint works in the shoulder. And last, gliding joint. A gliding joint is when bones sort of rest on top of each other and slide on top of each other. Examples. What's happening here?
They're gonna be the jaw.
Good.
Your vertebrae stacked one on top of the other with a disc of cartilage in between. That forms gliding joints, so just kind of slide on top of each other. You guys do have homework due Wednesday, but you'll have some time to work on it tomorrow because I'm not going to be here.
Do you think we'll be able to finish it?
Maybe.
What?
What is it?
It's on the board.